Around 20,000 years ago, at the height of the last ice age, a group of people walked across a patch of wet clay on the edge of a shallow lake in what is now far southwestern New South Wales. There were adults among them, and teenagers, and small children. One of them was running hard, at close to the speed of an Olympic sprinter. Another moved on a single leg, hopping, keeping pace with the rest. They crossed the soft ground, left it behind, and got on with their day. And then the sun baked that clay hard, the wind buried it under sand, and their footprints sat there, sealed in the earth, for 20,000 years. Until, in 2003, a young Aboriginal woman walking that same country looked down and saw them again. This is not a carving. It is not a painting or a tool or a bone. It is a moment. An ordinary few seconds of ordinary life, in the middle of the Ice Age, pressed into the mud by the actual feet of actual people, and preserved so perfectly that we can now stand where they stood and follow, step for step, exactly where they went. This is Ancient Aussie History, where we go looking for the parts of this country most people never find, and the ancient story most of us were never taught in school. Subscribe now, and if you'd rather listen, every episode is also a podcast on Spotify, link below. And leave a comment telling me whether you'd ever heard that Australia holds the largest set of Ice Age footprints anywhere on Earth. Because it does, and almost nobody knows it. The country that keeps the past. To understand the footprints, you have to understand where they are. This is the Willandra Lakes region, a World Heritage listed stretch of far southwestern New South Wales, and the same country that holds Lake Mungo, where the oldest human remains ever found in Australia were laid to rest more than 40,000 years ago. Today, it looks like the driest place imaginable. A system of long dead lake beds, dunes of pale sand, and eroding clay ridges baking under an enormous sky. But it was not always dry. During the Ice Age, these lakes were full. Fringed with reeds, alive with fish and birds, ringed by people who lived well on the abundance of the water's edge. And that is the key to everything. Because when it rained, the edges of those lakes turned to soft, fine clay. People and animals walked across it. The sun then hardened that clay into something almost like cement, holding the shape of every footprint. Wind-blown sand drifted over the top and sealed it away from the air, from water, from the erosion that destroys almost all trace of the human past. What was created, without anyone intending it, was a natural recording device, a layer of ground that caught a single day and then locked it shut for 200 centuries. It is worth pausing on how rare that is. Footprints are, by nature, the most temporary thing a living being makes. You leave thousands of them in a lifetime, and not one is meant to last past the next tide, the next rain, the next gust of wind. For a set of them to survive from the Ice Age at all, an almost absurd sequence of luck has to line up. The ground must be soft enough to take the print, then dry fast enough to hold it, then be buried gently enough not to smear it, and then stay buried, undisturbed, for 20,000 years, before erosion peels back the cover at exactly the right moment for someone to notice before the wind erases it forever. Across the whole of human prehistory, that combination has happened only a handful of times anywhere on Earth. And the largest surviving example of it is here, in the Australian Outback, the woman who saw them first. In 2003, a young Mutthi Mutthi woman named Pappin Jr was out on that country, working with a team surveying the landscape, when she noticed something in the exposed clay. Marks. Depressions in a hardened surface, in a pattern that was not random. She had found footprints. And not one or two, but the beginning of what would turn out to be the single largest collection of Ice Age human footprints anywhere in the world. Over the next few years, a team of archaeologists, led by Steve Webb of Bond University, working with Matthew Cupper from the University of Melbourne and Richard Robbins, carefully excavated and studied the site. What they uncovered was staggering. Something in the order of 500 to 700 individual footprints, arranged in more than 20 separate trackways, each one a line of steps left by a single person moving across the clay. Using a technique called optically stimulated luminescence, which measures how long buried sand grains have been hidden from sunlight, they dated the surface to somewhere between 19 and 23,000 years old. This was not a monument built to last. It was a puddle of mud on a single afternoon in the Ice Age. And it survived. Put that date in context. 20,000 years ago, the last Ice Age was at or near its coldest and driest peak. Sea levels were more than 100 metres lower than today. The great cities of the ancient world were still 15,000 years from being built. There was no writing, no agriculture, no metal, anywhere on Earth. And here, at the water's edge in the middle of Australia, families were living, hunting, and raising children in an environment they understood intimately, leaving behind, entirely by accident, the clearest single snapshot of Ice Age daily life that has ever been recovered on this continent, reading a day that lasted a few seconds. If you've made it this far, here's the part that ties it all together, and it's the part that matters most. Subscribe now if you want more of this series, because this is where a set of dents in the ground turns into something almost unbearably human. Here is what makes the Willandra footprints unlike almost any other ancient site on Earth. A carving tells you what someone chose to record. A tool tells you what someone made. But footprints are not deliberate. Nobody set out to leave them. They are the unedited, unposed, entirely accidental trace of real people simply moving through their day. And that means they capture things no artifact ever could. Speed, weight, gait. Whether someone was walking or running, carrying something heavy, big or small, adult or child. The footprints don't tell you what these people wanted you to see. They tell you what actually happened. And what actually happened, 20,000 years ago, was this. Among the trackways is a line of prints from a person moving at extraordinary speed. The spacing between the steps so long and the toe impressions so deep that researchers estimate they were running at around 20 kilometers an hour, barefoot, across soft mud. That is genuine sprinting speed, the kind you would clock on a running track. Whoever this was. And the stride suggests a tall man, possibly close to 2 meters, was flying across that ground. Nearby, other tracks suggest a group moving together, perhaps in a hunt. And then there is the one that stops you cold. A single line of right footprints, pressed deep into the clay, with no left prints beside them at all. A person moving on one leg. The trackers who could read across time. Now, a Western scientist looking at that single-legged trail might puzzle over it for a long time. But the people who could read it instantly were already there. Because to interpret the Willandra footprints, researchers did something that should be obvious, but rarely happens. They brought in the world's living experts in reading tracks on the ground. Aboriginal trackers from the Western Desert, Pintubi men, whose ability to read a story from footprints in the dirt is a genuine, practiced, still-living skill of astonishing precision. The Pintubi trackers looked at that single line of right footprints and did not hesitate. This, they said, was a one-legged man. Hopping, and hopping fast, keeping up with the others. They were certain, in part because they knew a one-legged man in their own community and had seen exactly how such a person moves and what such tracks look like. The depth and the rhythm of the prints told them he was practiced at it, well used to travelling on one leg, perhaps steadying himself with a stick. Think about what that means. A living Aboriginal skill, passed down across the same deep time span as the footprints themselves, was used to read the movements of a man who walked this earth 20,000 years ago. One ancient culture's knowledge reaching directly back to touch its own past, across a gap of time longer than all of written history, and understanding it completely. That is the thing the textbooks almost never convey. These were not anonymous, prehistoric humans. They were people, in a community, with a man among them who had lost a leg and kept right on travelling with the group. Kept up, kept moving, was not left behind. Children ran on that mud. A sprinter tore across it. An entire, small, ordinary, human scene, frozen mid-step, and read back to us not by strangers but by the descendants of the very people who made it. And the trackers read more than just the one-legged man. Working across the trackways, they could pick out the difference between a stroll and a purposeful stride, between adults and children, between someone moving alone and a group travelling together. The kind of detail that lets you reconstruct not just who was there, but what they were doing. Some of the tracks read as a hunting party moving with intent across the lake margin. Others are the loose, wandering steps of children, the small prints darting about near the larger ones, exactly as children have always moved near their families. This is not a battle or a ceremony or a great event. It is more valuable than any of those, precisely because it is so ordinary. A slice of a completely unremarkable day, which is the very thing that almost never survives from the deep past at all. We have skeletons and stone tools in abundance. What we almost never get is a few living seconds, belonging to the living. This country, and these footprints, belong to the 3 Aboriginal groups who are the traditional custodians of the Willandra Lakes, the Pakanti, the Mutthi Mutthi, and the Nyampa. It was a Mutthi Mutthi woman who found the tracks, and it has been the traditional owners who have guided how they are cared for ever since. And what they decided is telling. After the site had been fully excavated, recorded, and studied, after plaster casts had been carefully taken of every print, the trackways were deliberately buried again, covered back over with the same protective sand that had kept them safe for 20,000 years. That was not neglect. It was protection. Exposed to the open air, to rain and wind and curious feet, the fragile, hardened clay would begin to erode and crumble within years. Sealed back under the sand, it can survive for millennia more. The footprints most visitors see today are exact replicas, casts displayed at the visitor centre in Mungo National Park, while the real thing lies safe beneath the dunes, exactly where the people who made it left it. It is one of the few great archaeological treasures in the world that was found, understood, honoured, and then, on purpose, hidden again. Not to keep it secret, but to keep it whole. A few seconds that outlasted everything. None of this needs a mystery invented around it, and it needs nothing supernatural to be extraordinary. There is no lost civilization here, no riddle, nothing that has to be dressed up. The plain truth is already almost too intimate to take in. That a group of real people, men, women, teenagers, small children, a sprinter, a one-legged man keeping pace, crossed a patch of wet clay on an ordinary day in the middle of the Ice Age, and that the ground held onto that instant so faithfully that 20,000 years later we can kneel beside their steps and know, with certainty, that a child stood right here, that a man ran right there, that this was a real afternoon in the life of real people. Everything else from that world is gone. The lakes dried up, the reeds died back, the animals they hunted, in many cases, went extinct. The languages shifted, the climate turned, empires that would not rise for another 15,000 years came and went on the far side of the planet. And through all of it, sealed under a drift of pale sand in the Outback, a few seconds survived. The softest, most fleeting thing a person can leave behind. A footprint in mud, outlasting stone and bronze, and everything we usually call permanent. The oldest continuous culture on Earth did not need to carve this into anything. They simply walked, and their country kept the memory, and their descendants were the ones who read it back. There is no grander proof of a people belonging to a place than that, an ancestor's footstep, found by their descendant on the same ground and understood without a word of translation. Australia holds the largest gathering of Ice Age footprints anywhere on the planet, hiding under the sand of a dead lake, waiting, as it always has, for someone to look down and see it. If this changed how you think about the deep history of this country, leave it in the comments. And subscribe to Ancient Aussie History for more of the strange, ancient, and unresolved corners of this country hiding in plain sight.